Welcome to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life, with psychologist and author of over 75 books, Dr. Barry Weinhold. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Get Real, How to Live a More Authentic Life with Dr. Barry Weinhold. Dr. Weinhold, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Last week was a bit intense.
It was, but it was good. It was an important episode. And, today we're talking about the broken mental health system. So I don't know how much less intense today's going to be.
These two episodes kind of mirror each other. And talking about what's wrong with our world, but I think it's important to know that. I mean, I've been involved in training of mental health therapists for over 35, 40 years.
Yeah,
and I've been a therapist for that same time, so I know quite a bit about the system from the inside. And it doesn't look the same to me as it might look to somebody from the outside. So I want to share an insider's view of the mental health system, that in hopes that it breaks some illusions that people might have, and also that it really it's another form of getting real. I mean, What is going on here? And let's talk about it, not try to just hide it and not speak about the truth about what's wrong with our mental health system.
The topic for this episode is, like I said, the broken mental health system. But will you tell our audience why you think it's broken?
Well, yeah, I have to go back a ways because I've been involved, as I said, for almost 40 or more years with training mental health people, being a therapist, and so I've had a lot of time to think about this and how to best do therapy with people. And the first mistake that we do with mental health practice is we use the medical model, which is we don't do anything to people until they get sick or something is wrong with them. There's very, very little focus on prevention. And that's where we make our biggest mistake as mental health practitioners, because about every dollar that you spend on prevention, you have to spend at least 10 or 20 on trying to remedy the problem after it's developed. And there's a lot of good strategies on prevention that work. In fact, I turned a whole university counseling program into a prevention program, just to show how it worked, and it worked beautifully. And so instead of us therapy, I had a staff of 6 therapists, well, 5 others besides myself, and we focused our time on program development, training, and looking at and doing research. And we trained paraprofessionals to do some of the therapy. Now, what is called the community mental health system. It's an old model that's been around for many years. It started with some research that was done in a hospital in Boston, I believe, where they wanted to find out the effectiveness of the therapy that we're offering. And so, but they ethically couldn't prevent people from getting therapy. So they had a wait list of about 6-8 weeks. And so they randomly selected people from the wait list to come in for therapy. The other ones just sat and waited. And then after 8 weeks, they followed up with them, and they found that many of the people who were on the wait list, when they called them to say, now it's okay, you can come in for therapy, they say, I don't need it. And they said, well, why? They said, we found other places to get it. Well, where did you get it? Well, I talked to my beautician when she was doing my hair, and it made me feel better. I was at the bar the other night, and I got in this conversation with the bartender, and he was really helpful to me. Or, my minister, I had more of a spiritual problem, so I went to see him, and he helped me a lot. And I have this neighbor who we talk over the back fence sometimes. And we got to talking about our issues, and I was telling him about mine, and he offered some advice to me that I never thought of. So, sorry, I don't need therapy. And they were surprised. And so what they began to see, that the people who have the closest and indigenous relationship already with people who are potential clients already have an opportunity to be helpers. And so sometimes all they need is a little training. And I did a couple of trainings with indigenous helpers, and that's what we did at the university. We trained people from the university and from the community, undergrads to be peer counselors. And so it's a way we use our time that is, again, out of kilter from the very beginning. Then the second mistake that we make is, I corrected this in the program that I directed, but I was much of a outlier, and I felt like I was out in left field without a glove. I mean, basically, almost everybody that goes into a mental health program is not even expected to look at their own issues. They're not. I mean, it's not part of the curriculum. If they do, it's up on their own and separate from what they're required to do to get a degree. I said, well, in fact, a lot of people that I got into my program, my master's program, came out of the undergraduate psych program. And so when I interviewed them, I say to them, is it true that you got into psychology to figure yourself out? Just baiting them a little bit. Oh, no. I'm an objective scientist. I never allow my issues to ever interfere with anything that's happening with my clients. And that's total bullshit. I mean, talk about a fantasy. I mean, obviously, you're going to get triggered by your clients. Obviously, your issues are going to come up. Obviously, they're going to interfere with your effectiveness. And so in my program, and often I would say to these people, well, maybe this program isn't for you, because we're going to expect you to figure yourself out before you graduate from this program, so that you don't do any damage. I mean, it's the Hippocratic oath, do no harm. And that's where it starts, I think. So first of all, we have therapists who are never once looked at their own issues and why they even became a therapist. And now we know from some research on disorganized attachment, and that about 90% of therapists have attachment disorders. And that's how they got into therapy, because they learned how to take care of their parents and other people in their family, and they got good at it. So then they made a career out of it. And then the other thing is that research shows that about 80 to 90% of the clients who come for therapy also have a disorganized attachment disorder. So it's the blind leading the blind. And they don't have any idea that this is doing harm to people. And then second of all, I mean, that in itself is those two things are certainly parts of a broken system. And the people that graduated from the program that I directed were far better therapists than they are today. I mean, I worked with over 1,000 therapists during my time at the university, and their training was far, far better than any training they would have gotten anywhere else. I can be not being arrogant about that, but I know that the fact that they did work on themselves, not that they were finished when they left, they had issues, but they knew what some of their issues were and knew how to skirt around them if they came up in their therapy. And so they were much better therapists and did less harm to others. Then in addition to that, I'm on a roll. Stop me if you have any questions.
I'm just soaking in all of the information right now.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is psychiatry. Well, it's a specialty, a medical specialty. And psychiatrists are trained mostly, I mean, about 90% of their training is how to administer meds to their clients. That's their primary focus. So when you go to a psychiatrist, you can expect to have a prescription for some kind of medication in your hand before you leave, almost always. And in case of the case I brought up last time about Bo Savage, he went to a psychiatrist, got meds, but then stopped taking them. And then his demons took over, and he committed domestic homicide and suicide. So psychiatry is limited, and we have to. Sometimes we put that halo around psychiatrists as we do around any doctor, that they're miracle workers and somehow they're going to totally understand and change our lives. Well, psychiatrists are not trained in dealing with demons, with early childhood trauma, and most of them know nothing about it. And so all they can do is give you a med to calm your symptoms down, and if you take that med, that might work for a while, but it does not deal with the cause of the problem. So I have a little bit, I don't have a lot of respect for psychiatrists. So, and I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But I want to finish with the rest of the things I think are wrong with the system. The last thing is that most people are trained to become behavioral therapists. Cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy are the two most common modalities they're trained in when they're get their training. And the why they're used is they're easy to teach and they're easy to use. It's quick and dirty. And what happens, though, is that you can't, but basically when you go to see a behavioral therapist, they will ask you, well, what's wrong with you? What are your symptoms? When you go to a therapist that knows about trauma, that isn't the question they will ask. They will ask, what happened to you as a child or earlier in your life? And what didn't happen that should have happened? Both abuse and neglect that might be causing long-term effects in your life. And we know from what I said earlier that whatever pattern is set early on is going to be the template for the rest of your life. So it's only stands to reason that that's what's going on. But behavioral therapy does not deal with that. They only deal with basically the presenting symptoms. And some of them are successful, and they temporarily make people feel better. I'm not saying there's no value in it, but it doesn't get to the cause, and they're not able to in any way possible to help people tame their demons, just looking at their symptoms without looking at the cause for the symptoms, where the demons started, where they were created. So that is another part. And I think about 90% of the mental health therapists use behavioral therapy. And there's only about 10% who are trained in how to deal with trauma. And some of those are excellent therapists. So you got to interview your therapist ahead of time to find out what they believe and what they do. And then the other thing about behavioral therapy, the reason it got so popular, besides it's easy to teach and easy to use, is there was research that supported it. They had what a lot of places call evidence-based practice. It means that you had to have research that showed that what you were doing was effective, or you couldn't use it. You were not allowed to use it. Insurance wouldn't pay for it. So everyone then started to say, oh, well, I'm using a practice that's evidence-based. I have research here that shows me. I went and looked at that research. It is crap. What they did was they took two groups and they randomly assigned them to two conditions. One of them, they got behavioral therapy, and the other one, they got no therapy. Now, guess who seemed to gain the most? Well, most of the gain wasn't as much as they thought, but the people who got some therapy did get somewhat better over the group that didn't get any therapy. Now, that's not legitimate research. I mean, they should have compared a trauma-based approach against a behavioral approach and see which one was more effective, but they didn't do that. So the research that supports this claim that they're doing evidence-based practice is phony. And I'm sorry, but it just doesn't cut the mustard with me. I mean, I'm an expert researcher. I know what good research looks like, and this is not good research. And anyone who knows anything about research would say the same thing. So, I mean, maybe there are a few studies that were good, but by and large, most of the studies that I looked at did not meet the standards I would consider to be good research. So that's in a nutshell, what I think is wrong with the system. And I have an example of probably an egregious effect on that, giving our theme about mass violence and mass killers. I don't know if you remember anything about this, but there was a man who went into a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, and
Of course.
shot up everybody in the movie theater. I think there was 17 dead and 70 wounded or something like that. 12 dead and 70 wounded. Turns out, and he used an AR-15 assault rifle, which I think is an assault weapon that shouldn't be in the hands of anybody with any psychiatric issues or any kind of untamed demons. And if there's any kind of suspicion that this person doesn't have their demons under control, they shouldn't have access to that kind of weapon. So I don't know how, but some way they have to be able to, the system has to be able to ensure that people with that kind of condition don't get their hands on an automatic or semi-automatic weapon. So anyway, this man named James Holmes was seen by a psychiatrist for 6 times before he committed this crime. 6 sessions he had with this psychiatrist. And she never picked up that this guy had untamed demons. Never picked it up. Probably was too interested in wondering what meds to prescribe for him. Anyway, he ended up sending her his diary, which was the mind of a madman, and which it was his journal, in which he exposed everything that he was planning to do for this killing. But he sent it to her, I think it was a day or 2 before he committed the murder, and she received it in the mail 2 days afterwards. And it was planned that way. It was kind of like an FU to the psychiatrist. And then this psychiatrist, who I'm sure she worked at the UC Medical Center and was, teaching as well as practicing therapy. So she was a well thought of and well respected member of the psychiatric community. But then in an interview and a newspaper article I read recently, I just got furious about this. She said, mass killers don't have mental health issues. I said, what? She said, they have moral issues. Now, that is the biggest cop-out I've ever heard. I mean, yes, maybe they have moral issues, but they do have mental health issues. They have untamed demons. And to say that, and then she added, well, they're clever enough to lie to their therapists and get away with it. Well, 6 sessions and you didn't pick it up. That's a bit passing the buck to the client. You should have picked it up, and that could have prevented that mass shooting. So I think we have just a broken system, and I've been sort of a voice in the wilderness, as I said, all my life about prevention and about trauma, and about you need to have therapists trained to understand how to treat trauma, and most therapists don't. So I've done what I can. I have an online course that's available to therapists it's called Trauma Informed Care for Practitioners. And people can take that course and learn how to learn how to identify trauma in your clients, because simply people who have this focus on the here and now don't even think about the past and how that could be bleeding through and causing the here and now problems. And so that's what I've done. And I'm going to create an advanced course, which actually will follow after I finish my book on how to tame your demons through self-therapy. I'm going to have an advanced course for therapists on how to use, what tools to use to help treat trauma in your clients, and that maybe will take a couple of years before I get that out there with all the other things I have to do. But it's my long-term plan to add an advanced course on top of the one that's more introductory. In fact, it's even a course that is taken by non-therapists, by emergency room docs or nurses or first offenders, first responders, and people like that, policemen, firemen. So it's a more of a generalized course on how do you recognize the symptoms of trauma. And that's the first step. If you don't recognize the symptoms, you're not going to be able to treat them. So, but it does need another advanced course that has some very specific skills in it. This is what you have to do to get people through their trauma. And I can talk a little bit more about that some other time. But actually, the next week, I'm going to be talking about some of that. So next week, I'll talk about how do you tame your inner demons, which is what therapists should be doing, but aren't.
They should be, but they aren't. But that's why you're here, right? That's why you're here. That's why you've written over 75 books on the matter. That's why you're writing one now on this specifically. And that's why you're doing this podcast, to spread this information to the next generation and the next generation after that.
So that's why I spend 70 to 80 hours a week doing what I do.
And that's why you are who you are. Is there anything you'd like to say before we go, before we pick this up next week with the final chapter of this conversation?
I think I've said it all. I mean, I don't know how to fix the problem. I know what the problems are. And I did what I could when I had charge of founding and directing a training program for therapists. And I made sure that and thank goodness the people who followed me, who now are in charge of that program, have actually done even better with that. When I first did, it was kind of so far off out in left field that I was afraid that people would really come down on me. So I was a little bit careful I was a little bit clandestine about how I got people to do their own work. But now it's built right into the program, and you have to, when you enroll in this program, which still exists at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, you have to present a personal development plan about what personal issues you are aware of and are working on, and the program itself will bring up whatever you're not aware of, because it's what's called therapist disease. Whenever they hear about the research or the studies of various psychological disorders, they immediately identify with them. They think, oh God, I have that one too. Which I had to deal with a lot of times with my students. No, you don't have that one. You may have a few minor symptoms of it, but not enough to call it that.
We're all very anxious about everything.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I'm excited to continue this conversation next week, and I hope that everybody stays tuned for that one. And if you need more help or more resources, check out the links in the description, both to the Google Drive with all of the self quizzes and everything that we've talked about so far in the show. And don't forget to click the link to check out CICRCL circle.org and reach out to Dr. Weinhold and find a wealth of information there. So thank you very much, Barry. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now. Bye for now.
Bye.
For more information, please visit the Colorado Institute for Conflict Resolution and Creative Leadership at CICRCL.org or click the link in the show notes.